So hello, welcome to this Facebook Live with Mandala Young Company. I'm Yasmin Sidhwa, I'm Artistic Director, and this is a group of young people where we're having another discussion all about standing up for justice in terms of Black Lives Mattering. That's what it's all about, that we need to do this, we need to speak out, we need to have the conversations with honesty and come from a place of where we're at. So we're really keen for you to join in, to give us comments and feedback, because we want to know where you're at, what you're thinking about. So yeah, it'll be on Facebook Live coming up now. So just starting. I'm coming to you, Ralph, and I just want you to talk about why you feel standing up for justice is vital for us to do right now.
Fantastic. Yep. Yeah. Oh, to the viewers, my name is Ralph Roque. I was born and raised in the Philippines, moving to the UK when I was 15. So I come from a strong East Asian culture and heritage. But I did grow up, born and raised over there. So I feel blessed. I feel blessed growing up with two cultures to identify with, seeing both sides of the coin. And I personally vividly witnessed both struggles and ignorance, and actually both sides, but I'll get to that later. With your question, standing up for justice, it is the vitality of it. I want to start with putting some logic to our viewers, actually. Let's start with the concept of justice. We got in the United Nations, UNICEF, Amnesty International, they all agree that justice in the broadest sense is to treat people how they deserve to be treated equally. Equality is a basic human right. So why do we need to stand up? We're in this narrative right now about Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Movement. So why do we need to stand up? Because this will affect all of us as a society. It doesn't matter if you're white, black, brown, yellow, pink, whatever. Just because it doesn't affect you doesn't mean you don't have to do anything about it. The thing is, humanity became a civilization by helping our neighbors. It's not the discovery of fire, it's not the discovery of technology, it's about the discovery of a community together. And not helping our neighbors is Neanderthal. It's primal. We wouldn't survive as a species, nor as a society. You see your neighbor. Put it this way. You see your neighbor's house burning. You say something. Always remember that injustice has a way of reaching everyone. And right now, it's about racism. It's about Black lives. Saying it doesn't affect me, well, my house is not on fire, is ignorant and it's inconsiderate. What if the fires of injustice reaches your house, metaphorically speaking? Let's say in the future, you've experienced injustice like Black people right now. Your neighbors see your struggle. They see that they can actually do something about it, or even speak up about it, stand up about it, but they kept silent. How would you feel? Alienated, like you're not part of this community. And silence and complacency is our #1 enemy right now, because it breeds injustice. It deconstructs the fabrics of our society. And this is why we need to stand up for our Black brothers and sisters who are suffering. To not speak for our Black peers is being part of that oppression, being part of that problem. Being silent contributes to the problem. And feel free to step in or if you ever disagree with my points, but I personally believe that standing up as a non-Black supporter against this injustice is perhaps a strong statement to other non-Blacks, because it shows that we are a community. This is not just a Black lives thing. It's us against racism. We are here. It's basically a statement that we are here with our Black neighbors in this fight. I'll share you a story. Actually, at work, I've eavesdropped, or actually, I heard a couple of white co-workers talking about the recent events. saying that they really feel bad about it, but they can't say anything about it because of their skin color. They're also of Eastern European heritage. They said they really feel the pain of the Black community, but they feel that they can't say anything. And me, I'm just not visible to them, but I'm just on the other side. I just peek through the door and say like, actually, you can do something about it. And I start educating them. And it's not their fault. It's not their fault to think that way. It's because they think that it's exclusively Black, but this is actually a societal thing.
Absolutely.
And
We're going to come on to that a bit later when we talk about structural and systemic racism.
Society, yeah. I'm yet to come with that. But to sum up my point, really, is that no matter what your color is, or if you're affected directly or not, it is part of our society. And to stand up together as one is a statement of our humanity.
Absolutely. I totally agree with everything that you've said, Ralph. And also in terms of the anniversary of what terrible fire at Grenfell, you know,
Yes.
that is also part of this whole fight for justice, this whole fight for what's been going on in the UK, in society. And yeah, everybody has to stand up for justice, because justice is about humanity. And so that is the statement. Justice is about a civilization, it's about humanity, and it's about reaching out and caring what's going on. So Ildi, I'm going to come to you. What is your take on this?
Wow, I mean, a strong start, Ralph. Thank you very much. And I almost felt that it's like a segue directed to me. Okay, dear viewers, I'm Ildi, lovely to meet you. I was also part of Mandala Young Company for a while back in 2017, 2018. It was a great time. But now after spending some time around the globe, and especially a lot of time in the UK, working, acting, and doing all sorts of stuff, I'm back in Eastern Europe, especially back in Budapest. So I feel that this was just a perfect connection to make. And actually, that's a very interesting point. I'm going to continue on that, okay, Ralph, because that has been something that is interesting to see, because the conversation is happening everywhere. It's true. It's even happening around here, despite the fact that, you know, because of historical reasons, this used to be a multicultural society. I need to point this out, but, you know, the storms of history were not kind to us here in Eastern Europe. So literally it was ethnically cleared out, First World War, Second World War, and it doesn't need more explanation, really. Anyway, so after, you know, the decades have passed, you know, people are thinking very differently around here, and there are historical reasons for that. You know, history of fascism, communism, we got it all. And basically why I'm mentioning this, because I found it absolutely fascinating that even myself personally, I had quite a fiery debate in my own household about what should we do and what should we think and should we say anything. And the reason for that being exactly what you said about Ralph. And my personal opinion is that aspect of cooperation is incredibly important at this point. And what you said about not speaking is contributing to the problem, is being ignorant. I think basically, if we look at our world, we cannot deny the fact how globalized it is. And the world is way too interconnected at this point to be ignorant of anything that's happening around us, even if it's not happening exactly how you said, Rolf, in our own neighborhood. It's impossible to be ignorant. The clothes you buy, the movies you watch, the news you read, everything is connected to this issue, and you cannot deny that fact. And this is how our society is set up, and this is how the world's imbalance in terms of strength and power is set up. But this is something that we're going to talk about later. But just to answer your main question for our first round was about why stand up for justice, and why do we have to stand up, and why is it so vital? And I want to say something to our viewers who might be wondering, just like how your colleagues did, Ralph, because I've been doing the exact same thing. I can tell this on camera. I was asking Yasmin, what should I do? Am I right for this? Should I really do this? Like, who am I to say anything? And you've been really reassuring in that sense that that we have to talk, even if we are not educated enough. But the important thing is that we want to be educated. And I personally think there are so many ways to be standing up. Obviously, around the globe, there are sympathy protests. Even in places where this issue is not present, we have different issues that are present that are very similar. It either has racist undertones, or it has connection to our own ethnic minorities here in Eastern Europe. The gypsy question is a massive question, have been for centuries. But there's one thing that is very important. I think you have to take, if you feel just as uncertain that as I did, just take one small step. Start learning, start speaking, start discussing. And I think that should be the start of something bigger, standing up and going to protest, just like how some amazing people who are on this panel did, but I'm sure they will tell all about it later. But just to answer your question from like a smaller point of view, or somebody who is coming and looking at it from a bit more far, but actually we should be looking at very closely. Start with something small if you feel uncertain, and then step by step you'll get closer to the answer.
Yeah, because if you stay silent, this is the conversation that, you know, many of us have been having. By staying silent, you're not being not racist, but you're not being anti-racist. It's not enough to say I'm not a racist. You've got to be anti-racist to change what's happening. So that, you know, and we have to be allies in this. The more people that want this and want this change, the more likely it is to happen. So even if you're having a conversation where you work, because a lot of people, as Ralph said, don't really know what to say or feel it's not their place to speak. It is. We've all got to address it. We've all got people in our networks that maybe haven't got historical facts or accuracy, or haven't watched any films, or don't know the history. And that's not their fault. It's not about blame and attack, but it is about, it's not enough to go, well, I don't know anything, so I'm not going to do anything or say anything.
Exactly.
No, you've got to now start educating yourself and having the conversation. So yeah, that's brilliant, Ildi, because you are coming from a very different historical perspective in Eastern Europe. And if you were to ask me about Eastern Europe and its politics, I would need to do a lot of learning. I don't know enough, you know. Let's move on to the next question, unless Kai and Alex, you want to comment on that, but or otherwise hopefully you'll get a chance to speak more when we go more in depth about the subject.
Yeah, no, I think it was well covered by Ildi and Ralph on that. I was very impressed.
Good. Yeah. Okay, so I want to come to, how do we see white and East Asian privilege? Because, and so then I'm definitely coming to you, Alex, and then I'm going to come to Ralph on this one. And you know, a lot of people find this a difficult topic to talk about, a difficult issue. So Alex, what's your take about white privilege?
Yep. So first of all, introduce myself. I'm Alex. I'm originally from around Oxford. And I'm currently studying acting down in Bournemouth. And I was involved in Mandala for several years from the start through to a couple of years ago where I moved to university. Obviously, white privilege is this big blanket statement that gets thrown around quite a lot. But the fact is, if you break white privilege down, it is the fact that because of the color of my skin, I'm a few steps ahead through the way that society is built, which is, it's infuriating is the only way to describe it, because I see my friends and the people who I've met over the years, whether that's through theatre, whether through sport, through school, seeing people who don't have the opportunities that I have, I struggle with it. And it's one of the things that I fully understand that that I have white privilege. My family, going through history, has been been very linked with colonialism. So my dad was born in what is now Zimbabwe, but was formerly Rhodesia, and his dad was born in Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka. So if you go back a few generations, my family have been part of that colonial history of Britain. And I think the thing that really gets me with white privilege is the privilege that your history is the history. So if you look at world history, particularly how it's taught in Britain, we are taught what is effectively white history. And the way that happened is people went around the world and did a very effective job of destroying other people's history, which is horrendous. And it takes away society, it takes away cultures, because cultures are built on their history and their stories and how they're created. So I'm going to lead a little bit into some of the other big things that have come in, and feel free to cut me off if needs be, but we're looking at things like the kind of linking towards the protest thing we're going to be talking about soon. The big one obviously around Oxford and quite a lot around the world is roads must fall. Obviously, it's a cause that I'll be honest, I believe in. I believe that there should be a removal of that part of the history, but in a very specific way. So my dad pointed out a really good idea of how things worked when he was in Zimbabwe. So they used to have statues of roads in the middle of the main street in Bulawayo, the town that my dad was from. And after the War for Independence, they took down those statues from the street. Exactly what people wanted, but rather than destroying them, they moved them to another part of the town in a place that was designed to show that history still exists. Because if we, particularly in Britain, as a society, take the history that we have molded in such a negative, horrendous way, and it gets destroyed, people won't get the opportunity to learn from those mistakes. People need to be reminded and challenged on their privilege to be able to know that that's how people grow. You give them the view of, this is what went wrong, don't let it happen again. And I think it's an important thing that you can do that on a really small scale. Like what people have been saying so far, if you hear someone say something at work, educate people. I'll be the first to admit I'm not the most educated on a lot of issues. I try to be. I've been trying to watch documentaries and read articles in the last few weeks because I want to know more, I want to help. But I want to be educated more, so if people have information to send me, I need to know it. If I say something wrong or if I say something that's incorrect, tell me, because that's the only way that we can break down the privilege and the sort of the structural misunderstanding and lack of understanding that's existing at the moment.
Absolutely. And it's interesting you brought up this roads must fall statue, because in our last panel discussion with the other young people, it was the day that the statue of what's his name, Colston, had been
from Bristol,
thrown into the river, which I really got that as a symbolic action at this time. But obviously they are dredging that back up. And I said last time, I think these statues should be put in some sort of museum or some place with their real history and how they have, you know, were part of slavery, were part of colonialism, were part of the structures that have kept and oppressed other cultures, Black people in particular. So I totally agree with you, Alex. And I'm glad you brought that up, because in Oxford,
it needs to be the idea of, because we have a lot of hero culture around people based on history, and people need to see the truth of people's sort of reality. So the thing, there's a few years ago, this still stands out to me. I really appreciate it. So in America, obviously they used to have Christopher Columbus Day. But obviously people have done the history and the understanding of Christopher Columbus and realized that he's not this heroic discoverer of the new world. He was somebody who turned up to a continent that was already full with cultures that have been there for generations, for thousands of years, and massacred them. So some states now, I think it's Florida or California, California, they've removed Columbus Day and made it Native Cultures Day. So it's a day, I think they've now made it a week, and now they're planning on making it a month. And obviously it's all part of this gradual process that people are going through. to celebrate the people, the wide variety of ethnicities that exist within a multicultural nation. And I think Britain need to do that on a wider scale as well, and start looking at how the celebration is not of archaic figures, it's of how all the wonderful aspects of our society from all over the world, of every ethnicity, every creed, every religion, come together to make what is a fantastic global society. And I think this is all, it feels like a process now where it's going in the right direction now. The momentum is strong from what I can see.
I think the momentum's strong. I think there's a long way to go, because it's
100%.
about, when we come on to structures, it is about how do you get rid of those. But in terms of
the momentum is strong.
Yeah, the momentum is strong, and I think this is a time where if we can't let go of the momentum. But going back to Alex's point, I mean, all of this needs to be back in school. The curriculum has got to be honest about colonialism, and there's a big move that the curriculum is, instead of being whitewashed as it has been for years and years, everybody knows their history. And this is again something that I was saying, in Germany I feel like they really did look at their history and what they had done, and they don't forget it, and they look at what they've done wrong, and what the tragedy, the brutality, and we need to do the same. So yeah, I totally agree with you there, Alex. But
I know there's a petition coming out. Also, I'll come back, let him go in a second. There's a petition going around that I'm more than happy to share with everybody in the group that one of my friends sent me, which is one of the government petitions to uphaul the education system and have better education about systemic and historic racism, and how that's worked in Britain and around the world, and how Britain's influenced that. So if anybody wants that link, I'll happily send it across.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you could, we'll probably put it in the comments. So if you share that, put
happy
it in
to.
the comments. So coming to you, Ralph, because obviously, I'd like you to talk about East Asian privilege. Obviously, I understand brown privilege being a mixed race, Asian and white mix, but I'm interested. Is the nuance different in terms of East Asian privilege, or is it?
Absolutely. Let me just before I go to the question, I would like to thank Alex for acknowledging his privilege. I know it's not easy to accept privilege. And I actually, even now, I am a person of color. I'm going to talk about East Asian heritage now. I am a person of color. I have experienced systemic discrimination in this society, and more so directly in my personal life. Though never to the degree of my Black peers, my Black brothers and sisters. I knew that I had that form of privilege being a lighter person of color. Let's take one example. I'll share a story, another story of me. Let's focus on police and profiling, since this movement, the Black Lives Movement, was sparked. The momentum that we're talking about was sparked by George Floyd. I know I have my brush into on unwarranted stop and searches from police, and here in the UK, but being a lighter POC, a person of color, I knew that if I presented myself correctly, I could get away. I could not be targeted. I could not be profiled. So I know for a fact when I go to gym, I've been stopped and searched because, of course, going to gym, I wear a hoodie, walking down the streets. I've been stopped before. I went into shops. I've been frisked because they thought that I was shoplifting. They found out that I was completely innocent. It's just because of what I wear. But I know if I presented myself correctly, let's say right now, if I presented myself with a nice shirt and everything else, I know for a fact that they wouldn't probably look at me that way. And that is the privilege that I have, being a lighter, a person of color. But the thing is, just because I need to look into how I dress, how I feel, how I present myself, I wouldn't have troubles. But that shouldn't be the case. I should be free to not feel anxious with what I wear or how I present myself to people of authority. And the thing is, I'm upset, I'm angry, but I cannot fathom what my Black neighbors who have grown to me like family, that has experienced these cases of profiling throughout their entire lives, even when they presented themselves at their best capabilities, being the most fully cooperative, it's still not exact, it doesn't fall correctly in their eyes. I mean, like, to grow up thinking that no matter what you do, your skin color will get people staring at you wrongly. It's messed up. It's like telling women what to wear so that they don't get raped by men. It's a form of victimization or victim shaming. You're Black and thuggish. It's your fault why the cops target you.
But it's beyond police.
It's beyond that. It's definitely beyond that. And I'm going to East Asian privilege now, because this victim shaming, this form of imagery is actually common among East Asian narratives. And I've tuned in last week's panel discussion where you and Anush talked about the colonialism within brown privilege, as you mentioned.
Colorism.
And,
colorism.
yes, colorism, exactly. Colorism in the East Asian community has a strong parallel with the South Asian community as well, and we have indirectly contributed in perpetuating anti-Blackness. It's a byproduct. I'm gonna focus particularly in my heritage, being of a Filipino background. We have similar colorisms in the Philippines. It's a byproduct of colonialism ingrained to us by our Spanish colonizers, where the narrative goes: if you're Black or you're dark, you're undesirable. If you're light or white, you're desirable. You know, that's a very common narrative, not just in the East Asian community, but also, I believe, strongly in the South Asian community as well. Being on your end, it's more onto the colonization of the British, and it's both are historical narratives of white supremacy. And I'll admit that with privilege comes with ignorance, and I hands down, I was ignorant when I was younger. I heavily believed that white supremacist narrative. I'll share you another story. Growing up, I got bullied for being, like, in Filipino terms, I'm actually quite dark. So I grew up being bullied. I got into fights, but like that, I believe that narrative so correctly, that being dark is so undesirable, that I didn't eat black pudding because I believed as a young kid it would turn me black. That's messed up. And I've also shared to you, Yaz, where relatives of mine have wanted to put me into under whitening surgery to become more desirable. And the thing is, we can't really blame ourselves because we didn't know any better. We were whitewashed to think that way by our colonizers. It was only when I moved to the UK where I started seeing things from another perspective, being removed from that culture, from that environment. That is when I really started loving my own skin. And I will go further as well, admitting this privilege, this mindset that I have, being awakened by this. This was actually taught to me by Black people, my Black friends that I developed when I moved here. I acknowledge my privileges now, and I wish to use that to help the people who taught me to love my own skin color. And that is how you should use privilege.
That is incredible, isn't it? Because the whole colorism thing is there, and it is because of a historical perspective that, you know, Black people, if you go back to slavery, Black people were othered, were not human, were not seen as human. And so the more you could be away from that, the lighter you could be, the more you reflected the white supremacists, the closer you were to being able to be accepted, to pass. You know, I have this conversation a bit in my family. You know, my children have a Jamaican father, and, you know, obviously me being Asian and white mix, my daughter sometimes goes, but you can pass. And I go, but at school, when I grew up, I was called horrendous names, Nignog, Chocolate Drop, you know. I grew up in a really white environment, so therefore I was othered. I was not accepted, and you have to be really strong in yourself because there's nobody else like you. So you end up always being different, having to fight the fight or finding a way to deal with it. And obviously, in terms of Black culture, which hopefully Kai you can talk about as well, you know, it is that thing that people want to straighten their hair, they want to bleach their, you know, and whiten their skin, and it is all stemming from historical and systemic racism and that, and white supremacy. So we've got to understand that it's not it, you know, and well, we have that in our media, the models and all of that about what is beauty and what isn't beauty, and what are the dolls that we play with, and what are the heroines or the heroes, who are they? All of that comes into the way that we've all been whitewashed. So I'm going to come on to talking about structural and systemic racism. And yeah, Kai, you haven't spoken on these other issues, and I wanted other people, so it's not always that a Black person has to talk about justice, because we all need to do that. But I do want to talk from your perspective. So yeah, Kai, what are your feelings about structural and systemic racism in the UK and the US?
Wait, first of all, can everyone hear me?
Is Kai gone?
Yeah.
Oh dear. So we have lost him.
I'm still here.
There we go. I can hear Kai.
I can hear him. I can hear him.
Can you talk closer to the mic? So yeah,
yes.
just you keep freezing, I think.
How about now? You guys are kind of frozen for me as well, so I can just hear you guys. Can you hear me though?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah.
So if you talk.
Yeah, cool. As long as you can hear me, that's fine. That's fine. So let me start off by introducing myself. I'm Kai. I'm a part of Yasmin's youth company. Would have been going to Palestine this year. Obviously, Corona happened, so that's unfortunate. But hopefully we're doing that next year. Yeah, and talking about the systematic racism, and especially in the UK and in the US, because we see a lot in the US, because that's where we get most of our media from. We get most of our media from the US, so we don't really think about it in the UK in a sense. We kind of think that the UK is kind of free from it. And especially over the weekend, it's kind of opened my eyes into thinking that the UK isn't just, the UK is just as bad or probably worse than the US, especially over the weekend with the Black Lives Matter protest. But I feel like with how the system is, not just as an education standpoint and also a government standpoint, is the fact that we need to take a step back. I feel like people are kind of afraid to talk about the topic of racism and where they truly come from. That's why I feel like, as Alex says, history has kind of been whitewashed in that sense of that we only learn about one side of history and not all. And if we do decide to learn, and if we do learn about other history, it's mainly at a small expense. And I feel like we kind of need to take a step back and understand the fact of that Black people are just as beautiful as other cultures as well. Like the Black culture is just as beautiful as other cultures. And in the educational sense, it needs to be kind of boiled down to the nitty gritty and just to speak on how it was really. Because I remember being in history back when I was in secondary school, never really learning about Black culture other than Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, Malcolm X, and then other than that, it was slave owners, slave traders, and it wasn't really making myself feel like I was a part of history, or I could be a part of history. And I think that we kind of need to go back and just be very hard and very nitty gritty with it, and just kind of educate everyone on the fact of that, like, Black people, we do have a history. Like, especially during now, a few of my mates have said that they couldn't really speak on the topic because they weren't educated. And I had a talk with my best mate, me and her, and we spoke about it. And I said that I feel like for one, it's human decency to stand up for justice as just as a human. Like, if they killed a child, everyone would be so upset about that, and everyone would be going against it. Even if you were a child, well, when you were a child and when you grow up as well, everyone sees it as wrong. And a lot of people have said to me that because they don't understand it and because they're not educated, they don't talk on it. And I feel like that's something that's very much kind of a defense mechanism in not trying to dip their hand into the pond. Because if you understand that the fact that we do deserve a life, we do deserve not to be brutally killed or just ripped away from our families, and you understand that you are educated on everything. Obviously, if you want to go further into it, that's fair enough. You want to get a bigger understanding of it all, that's fair enough. But I feel like some people kind of use the whole thing of I don't know enough about this topic to kind of say something. I feel like it's very much a defense mechanism into the fact that we do deserve a voice, because it's human decency. We all deserve to have freedom, and we all deserve to have a life. And then if we're talking about it from the government aspect, most importantly, the police, you kind of see the fact of that they kind of go after the minority. I saw a video on social media, and it was a panelist of police officers, black to white to Asian to Mexican, the entire lot. And you saw that it wasn't just the fact of that they were doing it because they wanted to, and they wanted to hurt Black people, they wanted to kill Black people, or so on and so forth. It was more the fact of that even then, even when you were a police officer, you faced injustice, because they were saying that when you're a police officer, if you don't get a certain amount of, let's say, a certain amount of arrests or speeding tickets or something like that, your pay goes down. Your status in the force goes down. And so then in the police, they decide that in order for us to get as much as we need to provide for our friends and family, they go after the minority, the ones that don't have the voice, which is really sad, and which in my case is my people, Black people all over it. It's the fact of that they want their quotas, they want to fend for their family just as how anybody wants to, and they go after the people that don't have much of a voice. And that's why I think it's so beautiful and so amazing, the fact of that during this time of Corona, there's a side to everyone that's saying we are all in our own separate homes. People are catching the virus. People are dying. It's such a sad time, but people are still saying, but that doesn't exclude that racism is still a thing. It doesn't exclude the fact of that people are getting killed, Black, white, Asian, Mexican, whatever, whoever, are getting killed in the street. And this isn't just a matter of Black Lives Matter. It's a matter of all lives matter, because I strongly believe that when racism towards Black people ends, racism towards all will end, because we will all start to realize that everyone is honestly the same. We all bleed the same blood. We all have all the same bone structure, the same organs, same everything. And when people boil it down to that and not just look at it from a front perspective and realize the fact that we're all equal, that's when the system, that's when education, that's when the government will all realize that we are one and we can start to fight as one and stand up for this injustice.
Thank you, Kai, because yes, you're still frozen, but we could hear you really well. I mean, obviously your statement, all lives matter, of course all lives matter. But at this moment in time, with the oppression that Black people have been going through for 400 years or more, we've got to speak up about their oppression. We've lost Kai for the minute, but hopefully he'll join again.
Oh no, I'm still here. But, since I'm frozen, I just closed my screen. But yes, Yasmin, not to cut you off, but I do agree. Like at this very point in time, like we need to be fighting for Black Lives Matter. We need to be fighting for the fact that we are human. We're not the worst of the worst. We're equal. We're equal in that. Like I saw years ago, I saw adverts and I saw TV shows. And when I saw a TV show when like a princess, she went out when she wasn't supposed to, and she had a good time in the sun, and had a good time playing around in the fields and everything, and she came back really dirty. But it wasn't like it was blotches of mud and so on and so forth. It was a whole body covered in dirt, which made her look black. And then in turn, the other person in the scene said that you look disgusting. And it was just more of the fact of that we're seen as that. And that was from a young age. Like my brother and sister would have been seeing that and watching that, and then they would question themselves. And yes, once again, I'm probably drifting off a bit, but once again, trying to pull it back. All lives matter, and no one is saying that they don't. Like we understand, especially as a black person, well, not as a black person, as me, I understand that like some people's lives, especially what people are going through, is hard. And it's a very hard thing. And especially right now, black people, as upsetting as it is, we can't breathe. And we kind of need to reiterate that with everyone and say, look, we understand we're not seen as much, but we don't understand why. And we know it's the system, and we know that we should care for our neighbors. I was taught from a young age to not just care for yourself, but care for those around you. Make sure you have a community. I wasn't just raised on my own. I had people from my friendship groups, my mom's friendship groups, people from my church. And it wasn't just a one person or two person thing. It was an entire community in order to raise one person, in order to raise multiple people. And we're not just saying that in with the community. It's not just saying that just because all lives matter doesn't mean that one person shouldn't be hurting when they should. And that's what it boils down to, really. But in that as well, if one person is hurting, everyone needs to put aside their differences, put aside their angers, put aside their well, not their sadness, but put aside whatever hostility they have towards a person and say, we're going to help you. And I feel like that's something that needs to kind of be reiterated. And that's why there's so many protests. That's why there's so many people speaking out right now. And that's one of the main things that needs to keep on being pushed, which I personally don't think need to be constantly pushed, when it's a basic human right to love for one another and to care for one another.
Kai, can you put your picture back up, because it's better to see your frozen face. Yeah, I can see you now. Yeah, thank you. I mean, I just wanted to say, because it's not just because white people don't like black people. This is all about money and profit. It's been that from the beginning of time. It's about who wanted more wealth. Why do you colonize other lands? Because you want to gain their resources and you want to keep it for yourself. And that's why black people have been oppressed throughout history, and people of color. You know, obviously the whole Asian colonization was a different thing. It was a different system. But the black system of slavery and the way, you know, I do think I would slightly disagree. I think the racism in America is more overt. The slavery is more overt. It's the incarceration of over 2 million people in prisons in America, who then for free have to make the parts and do the things for various corporates. So they need the numbers up to keep doing the work. So instead of cotton picking and all that other, and sugar cane, you know, or whatever they had to do, now it's keeping people in prison and incarcerating them for the smallest crime. But I'm not excusing Britain in this, because Kai, you know, I'm sure you all have examples, but I know my children do. Like you said, if you walk down the street, you're much more likely to get stop and search. If you go for a job, you're going to have to apply for so many more jobs than many white people will have to. If you want to get a rise in a job in an organization, it's going to be harder for you. You know, these are the things that are they're also unconscious bias, because people also reflect people who look like them and who they feel comfortable with. And you know, it's not to say, obviously in Oxford, in the schools, it's really multicultural, but when it comes to the systems, the economics, the opportunities, that is what is not being changed, because it doesn't serve a white supremacy. It doesn't serve the economic balance of power. And I have to talk about this because it is much bigger than people not liking the color of a skin. That's become a byproduct of it, and it's how it's seeped into everybody's psyche. But it's a way of manipulating people. So Ralph, I don't know if you want to talk a bit more about this, in terms of structure.
It is a very deep rabbit hole, yeah. So yes, I mean, you and Kai definitely touched a strong sense of how embedded these this racism or discrimination is within the UK, within our history, not just in the UK, but also in the US, globally. I mean, like, let's start with the definition of structural and systemic racism. It's discrimination that is deeply rooted and hidden within our practices, within our laws, within our systems, within our institutions. I can confidently say that, like, I guess we're all in the UK, but as Kai said, our media is still remains heavily US dominated. And the thing is, despite that we are essentially the other pond, you know, the other side of the pond, there are still strong parallels within systemic racism with the US and the UK. I'll point something out. The leaders, first of all, the leaders who don't say the country is racist. Let's go for the US. Donald Trump doesn't believe institutional racism exists in America as a response to the George Floyd BLM movement. This is coming from someone who labeled the BLM movement as, in quotations, his exact words, nothing but troublemakers and thugs, just before he became a president. The parallel to that, let's go to the UK. You and Kai, Yaz and Kai did speak strongly about the history. Let's speak about right now, modern. It's still here. Let's look at our British leader. Boris Johnson doesn't think Britain or the British are racist at all. Again, another response to the global BLM movement. This comes from someone who who has commented, you can literally Google this. This comes from someone who wants to recolonize Africa, because the continent and its black people would prosper better under white British monarchical rule, further justifying and labeling Africa's children as savages who wouldn't know what to do unless they're told to. That's just disgraceful, unspeakable. And in a way, these are our current global power leaders.
Absolutely. Ralph, I'm going to have to, because we're running out of time, because we've got so much to say. So I'm going to move us on, because I sort of want I'm going to come to each of you, and this is going to be your ending sort of thoughts, which you can talk about, because we wanted to talk about the importance of protests, but also what are we looking to change? What is the change that we want to see? So I'm going to see, you can talk about either or both of those, but we've only got probably a few minutes each to talk about those, or we're going to run out of our time. So I'm going to come to you, Ildi, and then I'm going to go to Kai, then Alex, and then Ralph. So Ildi.
Okay, first of all, I do apologize if I look at my notes, because you said incredible things, and And it was so important for me to write down. And this is kind of also my way of learning and educating myself as much as possible. So I do apologize if that doesn't come across as great on camera. Okay, I think first of all on the protesting, that's something when I first read your question and we were thinking about, okay, should we talk about this aspect of the whole situation? I felt that first of all, it's the ability to protest and the ability to go on the street and the freedom to go on the street and say what we think and gather together is already such a huge privilege. It was not, still in many places, it cannot happen. You know, we know, we just read the world news, we know about countries where that's not even possible. So that already gives us not just an opportunity, but an incredible responsibility to make sure that our voices and our opinions are heard. And I personally want to say thank you to everybody who went, especially you, Kai. We heard at the beginning of the conversation, maybe that wasn't caught on camera, but like, we are so proud of you that you were even on stage and spoke about everything. Incredible, really incredible. And there was one other thing that I wanted to reflect on, which was when you guys talked about facing our past. And I think you mentioned Germany, Yasmin. I think this is something that coming from the background that I'm coming from, which is, as we mentioned, is Central Eastern Europe and you know, continental Europe. Like that's a history, and that's a history that and then a struggle that we're constantly doing. So I might not be the best person to talk about how Britain should face its history, but I do know a bit about facing history in terms of everything that happened. And that was this great example, Alex, that you said about statues and how where they should go. And there is this memorial park here in Budapest, which is full of communist statues. And obviously it was a very similar process actually when they were torn down. And people were breaking the head of Stalin, you know, when the Iron Curtain broke down. Just a reminder, like, you know, Hungary was part of the Soviet bloc back then. Long story short, I think that note was very interesting, and it's also very important. I think it could be a great thing to remind everybody what exactly happened and help us further educate ourselves. And also the note about histories being written by winners, and it's also written by the winner's perspective and the center's perspective. I think there's a huge imbalance, not just in terms of the economy, and also the distribution of wealth, the distribution of goods and resources that we really need to rethink. And I think this is probably the hardest thing about facing this whole reality, because it questions the entire morality of the way we live, every single piece of it, the way supply chains are set up, the way our education system is set up, in our entire globalized world. And it's very, very uncomfortable. And that's probably something that I also want to touch on, the kind of this personal aspect of this whole thing, that the creating the change that we want to see. Personally, listening to all these stories and reading and trying to educate myself and trying to educate the people around me sometimes is uncomfortable. It's not a nice thing to do. It's not easy. But this is a time when we need to realize that. Especially, I remember I went to see an exhibition. I went to West Quay quite a few months ago, and there's this museum of trade, and I felt that, oh, this should be so interesting. You know, I'm definitely going to go in, and basically the exhibition made my stomach twist, and I felt absolutely disgusted, because there was an incredible exhibition about slave trade and the reality of slave trade. And I just couldn't believe it. I remember I took a picture of every single thing, because exactly what we all talked about, this is definitely not on our history books. And entire chapters should be rewritten from the perspective of those who've been oppressed, and the perspective of those whose history were written out and completely just completely vanished out of our history books. So that is, I think, the first step that we need to do, and also my closing remarks would be something that I feel very grateful to be on this panel, and I think we should continue the conversation, and I will definitely try my best to do my own little part.
Thank you, Ildi. Coming to you, Kai, I'm sort of going condense, just so we can get there. So yeah, Kai, do you want to talk about protests? Because obviously, yeah, before the panel started, you were on the protest in Oxford and you were speaking up, but also what is the change that you want to see? So if you can do that not in a long thing, I want to get Alex and Ralph in.
Yeah, I'll keep it short and sweet. Protests, it's the protests that have been going on, and how I've been seeing it, it's been beautiful for me, because it's kind of been, as I said during my when I went to the protest, it's showing that people do love me even though they don't know me. And it's the same for so many other black youths, black people, that you don't know me but you love me and you want to stand with me. And I feel like it's so beautiful. And it's something that I haven't gotten from a few people who I know personally, and it's kind of made me see everything in a different kind of light. And what I really want to see change from this is I think what I've been trying to say is that the education system needs to be changed, because if as soon as that changes, everything else changes afterwards. Because the education system, that's where you build your leaders, that's where you build future anything really, because all the kids and teens in there are learning about where their next steps in life will be. And this is a step in life that people need to know. Black people need to know, white people need to know, everyone needs to know, because it shows that even though there was sadness, even though there was pain, even though there was so many different things, you start to appreciate what you have. You start to appreciate the fact that you're actually living here with black people as your best friends, black people in your friendship groups, people you work with. Like, you start to appreciate them just a little bit more, because you understand not what they have gone through specifically, but what their ancestors have gone through. You start to appreciate what they've done and stop seeing them as just a black person. You start seeing them as a person and who's gone through stuff, even though it doesn't hurt them physically, it still gets to them mentally. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to say for me to close.
Thank you, Kai. No, that's brilliant. Alex, we've probably got about 2 minutes for you and 2 minutes for Ralph and 1 minute for me.
That's fine. I'll keep it nice and short and sweet. I think when it comes to protest, I think protest is so crucial to being able to make long-lasting change, because it's the catalyst. It's the spark that shows a group of people how the world feels. So I love seeing the fantastic levels of support that we're getting for the Black Lives Matter protest, and it is incredible. But it's just the start. Kai's mentioned it, everyone's mentioned it. These protests are the start of a systemic change that needs to happen. That's in the education system, that's across the economy, it's across various socioeconomic fields. We need to be breaking down those historical boundaries and, I guess, what's the word? Obstacles that have been put in people's way based on the color of their skin. And I think particularly our generation, there is a clear drive across, it seems to be across the world, of everybody going, we've had enough of how things have always been, and we're going to make a change. And there's a thing that my friends always say to me, and it's a really important thing to think about, which is big changes don't happen if people don't stand up. So if you're loud, if you stand up and you challenge, that's what's going to make our world better.
Absolutely, Alex. Thank you. Ralph, coming to you, and because we're really running out of time.
Yeah, I'm just going to grow on to everyone's points. It's so good to feel that we're all cross-pollinating. The importance of protest. Hello? The importance of protest is... Oh.
Yeah, I can hear you. Carry on,
yeah,
Ralph.
you're fine.
Okay. Well, the importance of protest is to make noise when conventional versions of conversation doesn't work. If the suffragists didn't make noise, women wouldn't be able to vote, etc., etc., etc. And the thing is, I echo the changes that we all want to see, to acknowledge our British colonial past through history, education, reform. And I'm gonna relate back quickly to my story of what my black mentors, my black friends taught me to love my own skin. I looked back into my own colonial history, and I just figured out that all the traditions, the language I speak, the practices that I do are not of original Filipino origins. All our tribal identity, language, writing, everything was wiped out and replaced. And I don't want that to my Black brothers. And that's why I acknowledge, secondly, and this is the change that I want to see, and is to acknowledge the privilege that we all have. That's why I say thank you to Alex, and that's why I say it to myself, because this message doesn't just go to people of white people, but also to people of lighter POC. Like, we have privilege. If Black people didn't exist, it would be us on the firing line. We need to appreciate them. We are one world, one tribe, one planet. Go into your communities, white, Mexican, Black, Asian, tell your communities, speak to your family. If we don't speak about this, be comfortable in talking about this within your circle. Even if you don't know anything, it's a learning process. We all need to acknowledge this.
Thank you, Ralph. So I'm just going to say, because obviously all of us have come from this from a different perspective, and it's the conversation, then it's the action, going to protest, and then it's demanding absolute change. It can't just be reform, it has to be complete change. But I said this on the last panel, this is a moment in time where I don't think people have been galvanized since the civil rights movement. You know, yes, there were riots and there was protest, but they're big movements that have changed the nature of politics and the nature of structures have been done by the voices and the protests of the people. So let's keep doing it. The momentum cannot be lost. And I'm really glad that all of you have joined me on this debate, and we want all the people watching, all your comments. So please do join. And yeah, it will also be posted on YouTube Live. So thank you, and yeah, we hope to see you again on Facebook Live, because there'll be more panel discussions coming up from Mandala Theatre Company.